Hi everybody, good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar today. So yeah, Kellyanne Harris here if you haven't met me before. So I'm with Digita or Agriculture Victoria based at Bendigo. So today we have a webinar on telling your story with maps. So we've got Shane Bradt. Hopefully I said that right. Shane, I've been
Yep.
practicing, I probably still got it wrong.
Uh,
Um, That's all good. So Shane's an extension specialist in Geospatial Technologies from the University of New Hampshire in the USA. So I was fortunate enough to meet Shane earlier this year when I went over with eXtension Oz to the eXtension sort of conference in the US. And Shane's session was one of the sessions at the conference that I went along to on sharing a story with maps, and I found it a very valuable session, and especially like mapping for a lot of us is sort of a bit daunting, but this way of doing maps you can do it without having to know any coding or have any real experience in maps, which I thought was very valuable. So we've asked Shane to present this webinar for others to sort of I guess see what I saw in the US, and it's our third in the series of webinars that we've hosted now coming from the conference, the Extension Conference. So our first one was on running effective webinars, and the second one was the use of drones in the USA. So this is our number 3, and we'll certainly have some more in the suite of webinars coming out of our trip to the US. So Shane sort of said as we're going through, you can certainly unmute and ask him questions as we're going, or even put them in the chat function. But yeah, unmute yourself and ask him questions as we're going. He's happy to have this webinar as interactive as you guys would like to make it. So thank you, Shane, and I'll hand over to you.
okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. And I think you're right that a lot of people view mapping or sharing maps as a very daunting activity. And I won't lie, there still is a lot of work to make a really good, compelling map with the right data. But I think one of the exciting things now is that your ability or technical knowledge needed in order to make an online map, and especially to be able to tell a story with an online map, is so much lower than it's ever been. And in fact, this is one of the areas that a lot of companies, and including Esri, whose products we'll be talking about in this webinar, have really devoted a tremendous amount of energy. And it's both interesting and exciting to see how different people are using it. And also I will just say, and we can talk about it as we go along, that the story map idea is so powerful that it doesn't even necessarily need to be related to maps. So everything we're talking about here, and you'll see as we go along, most of them, if you wanted to share images or videos, you could use almost the same exact approach as when you're sharing maps. So what I'll have is just a few slides to get started here, and then I'll pretty much be showing you how these sort of maps work and how you might make one. So I think this first slide is just showing you a map, and a lot of times people would make online maps over the past few years, and they might go to something like Google Maps, and there's a whole variety of programs and companies that let you make online maps. But a lot of them would look like this. This just happens to be a map of the different folks in the United States who have a similar job to mine, which is outreach specifically in geospatial technologies through cooperative extension. And I'm over here. I happen to be lucky enough to be very close to the folks who work in Connecticut and Rhode Island, so it gives me a chance to collaborate with them a lot. But this map in some ways is interesting, and in some other ways is kind of boring, because there's nothing that's calling you necessarily to know what this map is about, how to interact with it, why you might interact with it. And if you're a map person, you'll probably zoom around, you'll assume that the points probably have something underneath them if you click. But where is the call to action, or where is the way that you engage people with this map? And it's probably pretty limited for most people. So big question came then, especially as more people are making maps online, how do you control your message with them? How do you present information and lead people along through while still using maps? So the company they're talking about is Esri, used to be called ESRI, but now it's very clear they want to be called Esri. And it's one of the biggest mapping companies in the world, if not the biggest. Now, I will say that Cooperative Extension in the US never endorses a specific product or vendor. There are plenty of other ways to make similar types of online maps. It's funny, the only Facebook ad I've ever clicked on was one that said, looking for an alternative to ArcGIS Online? Try Mango Maps. And I thought, wow, Facebook really knows me well if this is the ad that it gave me. And so there are others at Google Maps. Even in MapQuest you can make them. Mango Maps, as I said, there's another one. The list goes on and on. So why did we decide to focus on these story maps? One is because Esri is the dominant GIS, at least in the US. So a lot of people are already using Esri products. Two is that when you look at the total amount of things that you can do, it doesn't seem like any other company or the open source software have that complete package yet. You can do, if you have desktop GIS, you can tie in directly to online. If you have these things online, you can look at them in your desktop GIS. You can have mobile devices you go out in the field and collect data with. And you can take your maps and not just show them as maps, but show them as something they call a web app or a fancier version of that map. And it seems to be, in the recent past, one of the highest impact versions of that web app is something called a story map. Now, the idea of a story map isn't exclusive to Esri per se. If you Google story maps, you'll come up with plenty other types of use, like in the analog world with people drawing and mapping out stories, or even there's other open source ways, I think, online to make story maps. But again, the reason we chose to focus on this was that from end to end, there's so much that you can do once you get into this online system of Esri's that it makes a lot of sense to focus here. And they have put such a big emphasis now that you can see the website storymaps.arcgis.com. That's a brand new website within the past year. You used to have to go and everything was through the underlying technology called ArcGIS Online, but they've shifted it over to give such prominence to story maps that it's interesting, and this website grows in capabilities all of the time, and we definitely will be looking at it today. Now, when you think about what is a story map and how could I use it, again, the idea is to take information, whether it's maps. Some of these you have to use maps, but others you can use maps, images, videos, and come up with some way to present your information, your data, to then make some sort of a point. And I think that part of the problem, too, with any map is that it does take a while to consider what it is that you want to present, and sometimes we're so in love with everything that we have, all of our data, that it's hard for us to step back and say, what is it we're trying, or we would like people to get out of our map, and how can we present only that information? So I think having all of these potential ways that you can do it make it extremely powerful and useful. And you see, this is a grid of all of the story map types or templates that they have. What we're going to do in a minute is we're going to look at an example of all of these to see how they look in the real world. But I will tell you that this map tour one was the very first one that they did. And then these three down here at the bottom, which are some of the most interesting, have only come out since July. In fact, back in March, at the conference, Cascade and Crowdsource didn't exist. They were released in July, and then this shortlist one was released since then, I think maybe possibly even in September. So this is an area that's constantly evolving and changing, and the beautiful thing about this is that you can do pretty much everything we're going to talk about tonight with one of their public accounts, which people can get for free, and there's no coding experience necessary at all in order to do this. And in the past, this was not the case. If you had an online map, you would have to have some sort of coding experience to make sort of a slick, interactive version of it. And even these, if you think about how would you present a series of information, if you could create your own website, you might have to do coding, or you might pay a company or get a product like Squarespace or Weebly. And in some ways, what you can produce with this free online account in a story map format might be just as compelling or effective as any website that you could create using other means. So there are limitations with this. Obviously, there are templates, and you can only do what the template allows you to do. if you are somebody who enjoys coding, all the templates are available for download and you can customize them yourself. But I find that most people that we talk to, that's sort of a level past what they're interested in. Mostly they're interested in making cool, interesting online maps. And we teach 2 workshops on this. Actually, we teach a 3-hour morning workshop called Getting to Know ArcGIS Online, which is the underlying basis for the technology. And then in the afternoon, we have help people to learn how to specifically make story maps. And we focus on a few of these different types and lead people through that process. I will say that I don't know how many folks out there have used Esri software or GIS software in general, but geographic information software is not known for being tremendously user-friendly. And I will say that these, compared to what you have to do with the desktop software, these are much easier to use. There's always little finicky things that you have to deal with, but especially, and particularly the story maps, their interfaces are really easy and seem to be well thought out with how you build and create them. So hopefully this gave you a bit of an idea of maybe what story maps are, why you may want to use them. I'm just going to pause to see if there's any questions before I go on to actually showing you examples of all of these types. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want people to get an idea of what these actually look like. So pause, just see if anybody has questions.
Yeah, so if anyone's got a question for Shane, yeah, unmute yourself and go ask away. Oh, looks like we've got silence.
Okay,
If
great.
you have any questions, add them to the chat too, and I can always ask Shane during the next pause as well.
Okay, great. So we're going to go just briefly. I have one loaded of each type here. And this is what's called the basic story map. And in some ways, it's not that compelling, but something that's of interest is that if you do a Google map and you share a Google map sort of looks like a Google map. You don't have the ability to customize maybe this header as much, to put some sort of icon or logo in here, and to not let people just see it as a plain old Google map. All of these mapping programs you can embed inside of a website. That's not what I'm talking about, but sort of a full page, this is the map. So this is simply just a simple map that shows all of the Major League Baseball parks, and it has a pop-up here where you have a little bit of information and a picture of what that food looks like. And you can zoom in and out on the map. So not that dramatic, maybe not as interesting from a storytelling perspective, but a fairly simple way if you have a basic ArcGIS Online map to make a little bit slicker version of that map. This one, obviously, you have to use there has to be some sort of mapping component involved to it. Now, probably a little more along the line of stories is what if you have 2 maps or 2 data sets which you'd like people to compare? And there's 2 different ways that they have those set up. One is called a swipe map, and this is an example of a map that's sort of comparing the amount of internet usage to the amount of income. And you can see already that this one might have more of a way that you can tell a story. So this is a little area which you can make shrink and hide or reveal. And you also can have little tabs here. So this is zooming into specific areas if you have points that you want to make about people who live in New York City versus other areas. And what the swipe allows you to do is grab onto this vertical line and sort of move it back and forth to be able to compare and reveal data. So not overly sophisticated, but a pretty useful way for being able to look at patterns. And because there's this line running down the middle, it almost calls out to people, okay, what's going on here? This is different. Drag it around and start to navigate. So the second way that they have to compare 2 data sets is something that's called the Spyglass. And while these may look very different, this is just a different checkbox in the template. So you would say, I want to compare 2 maps, point to the 2 maps and say I either want a Spyglass or I want a swipe. And so this is looking at current aerial photographs compared with historical drawings of the way that Washington, D.C. was supposed to be laid out. So again, people love this because it looks interesting, but also you have this Spyglass. You're very compelled to just look around and see what's going on. If you have a series of things to compare, they have 3 different ways you can do it. One is called tab. It's called a map series. And you notice on this first page, there's no map at all. You don't need to have a map in each tab. You could have a website embedded. You could have a map. You could have a picture. You could have a video. And of course, because there's tabs on the top and you have text here, you can lead people through some sort of a narrative of what you would like them to get out of the information that you have available. So you're able to tell your story in a way that you'd like it to be able to be told by leading people through these tabs. In a very similar way, you have this using buttons, and part of the reason they had buttons is when you have tabs that have text here, there's only so many tabs you can fit on a given page, so by turning them into buttons, you could potentially fit more. And if you notice, although these colors are hard to see, if you drag your cursor over here, it shows you what the names are. And this is very similar. When you click on one of these, so number 5, it changes this side panel. And of course, you can have an interactive map that has data underneath for each of these, or a picture, or a video. The third way you can do this is something called the side accordion, where you have these different areas. So when you click down here on number 2, it folds up and shows information here and then changes the map on this side. And if you click down here, notice it keeps the map in the same location and allows you to move back and forth. Again, giving you a way to sort of compare multiple types of maps or information and sort of lead people through a narrative. Now this map tour is, remember as I said, this was the first ever story map that they created, and it's in some ways it's very different than the others, but this one is specific if you have a whole bunch of points that you'd like to be able to display on a map, and for each point you'd like to be able to have people click and then see an image. This is the map for you. It's not as flexible as the others. Pretty much what you see is what you get. You can tweak a few settings, you can make a few changes, but you can see here Delaware State University uses this to give people a tour of their campus. So this is an interactive map that you can move around, zoom in, zoom out. You can display different sorts of data on this map. You can also click down here to advance to the different pictures, and once you do that, it'll move the map around to the different pages. At the Extension Conference, it was mentioned to me, wow, there's a lot of ways to do this. Instagram might do this, or Snapchat might do this, or other apps, and I agree, there's lots of ways that you can do this. This may not be the best for you, but again, it's fairly easy, it's free, and as long as you have images that are geotagged or you know where they are, you can put something together like this without too much problem. Another type of narrative is, and you can think of sort of this as a big coffee table book or a book that has large pages. You have this side area which can have whatever you want, images, text, video, and you have this other main stage, they call it, which could have images, video, maps. And as you scroll through this page, it sort of turns to the next page. This information here is then whatever it is you want it to be. And then down here you can have interactive maps, and each of those will change sort of as each page is turned. And you can navigate here either by clicking down, by just scrolling down, or by clicking on these bubbles. And as you can see, the bubbles can have names as well for what you might like to show. And one of the new things you can do in the relative past is you can have the clicks down here on this affect what's shown on this side. That's one of the new features that they rolled out a few months ago, which makes it even more powerful. Now, taking this to another extreme, they came out with something recently called the Cascade Map, and this is one of those that wasn't available back in March. Instead of just scrolling on the sidebar, you scroll the whole page. So as you scroll down through this story map, you can then, again, have images, text, maps, different sorts of things that are embedded to display. Now, some of these, of course, and one of the problems with any of these is some of these are hitting real live data, and sometimes, like in the case of this one, it's taking a decent amount of time to load. But as you can see, the navigation is a little bit different here, so you can click up on this part to navigate and jump to either any part. And you can really tell that this allows you to have that sort of narrative experience. It takes over the whole screen and is very visual. And I will say, having designed some websites recently that tried to mimic this, having a website that does this is very difficult compared to how easy it is to do this in a story map. This is the hardest story map to build out of any of them. But again, it can be free and it's relatively easy to create something like this. Two of the other new topic or types is something called a crowdsource map. Now there's lots of ways to do crowdsourcing, and I teach a class here at UNH, an academic course about crowdsourcing, but the cool thing about this is that it looks pretty good. Some of the maps that I've seen with crowdsource mapping applications actually look pretty crummy. And in the past, you could set something up like this in ArcGIS Online, but everybody had to have an account through your organization. We've done a few things like this here at the university. It turns out that anybody can participate in this. If you have an ArcGIS Online account, that's fine. If not, you can sign in with Facebook, Google+, with Twitter, or even be a guest. So this is a big deal to me because for a lot of our data collection procedures, we don't necessarily want people to, or have to give out accounts to people. Then anybody can sign in without having to pay anything and contribute to this map. And then the very last one is sort of a souped up version perhaps of that map tour where you can have different tabs to display information, and each of these little buttons has an associated picture and perhaps a little bucket of text. You can see that those pictures are also over here. And the maps are in sync, so if you zoom around a map on one page, it'll be in that location on the next. And also what's displayed over here on the left is based on what's visible in the map. So if we zoom into this location, for example, only the points that are visible on the map will be displayed here, and all of the other maps will then be in sync with that same location. So that's just a very brief whirlwind tour through the types. It's a link that I will show you later on. But I will show you a link where you can get to all of these. So if you're interested in exploring these on your own after the podcast, after the webinar, then I'll send you one link. It's actually in a future slide where you can get to all of these very easily. So again, basic, swipe, Spyglass, tabs, bullets, Accordion, map tour, map journal, Cascade, crowdsource, and what was this called again? I think it's called lists. Oh boy. Site lists, I think. Something like that. So any brief questions on that? Sort of, this gives you a general idea of what it is, how they look. And again, these are all just based on templates that you put information into. None of these were made with anybody that had experience in coding.
Cool. Any questions? Okay. Remember to unmute first before you ask a question.
We've had a question.
Lots of people talking. Okay.
We've got a question in the questions box from Sue. Can you explain geotagging photos, and can you construct a map if you have taken photos that aren't geotagged?
Yeah, so I mean that could be a whole webinar in and of itself about geotagging photos. But so there's a couple of different things about geotagging photos. One, you definitely can make a map if you don't have your photos geotagged. Somehow, some way, you're going to have to identify where those photos were taken on the ground, since you can't automatically tell the program that. But there's lots of ways that you can do that. So yes, you can do it. It might be tedious, but you can do it. As far as geotagging photos, there was lots of ways in the past to do it, and some of them are still relevant, but if you have, for example, a mobile phone and you take a picture, as long as your geotagging information is enabled on your phone, every picture that you take with that phone will have a geotag. And a lot of the pictures that people take now, I would assume, around the world, at least I know in the US, is with their mobile phone. So most people's pictures, unless they've blocked it, do have geotag information. So just basically saying this picture was taken here on the Earth. I will say that having played with this a little bit, you do have to be careful, and it's a good thing, that the geotagging information is not automatically passed back and forth between programs. So I'm a Mac user and I have an iPhone, and to do this demo map that I did in San Antonio, which of course looked so smooth the day of, I was fighting with it the day before because I couldn't get my points to show up on the map. It turned out that even though my phone's geotagging was turned on and Flickr's permission to use the geotagging information was turned on, the Photos app on my Mac was stripping out the geotag information when it was moving the pictures to Flickr. So there's actually 3 locations in my flow of devices that I needed to say, yes, it's okay, you can pass the information about location. I think that's a good thing, but it also was a bit frustrating until I figured out all of those angles. If you have GPS points for pictures that were taken, there's a variety of ways. And you know, if there's interest in this, a lot of interest, I could either provide information to be shared or possibly do another webinar, but I don't want to spend any more time on it than that. Otherwise, we could spend the next half an hour talking just about that. Hopefully that addressed the question well enough for the moment. Anything else?
Any other questions from anyone?
Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to briefly show you how to make a couple of quick story maps just so you get a feeling for how it may work. And the first one I'm going to make is one that has geotagged photos. So how you make any of these things is you go to storymaps.arcgis.com is the website, and then I'm going to click on this button that says My Stories. I mean, this is new in the past 6 months as far as I know. And if you have a bunch of stories, this is a little interface where you can go ahead and look them over and check things out. But if you want to create a new story, you click right here on this Create Story button. And I'll just repeat that sort of this interface, the way this works and how graphically oriented it is a giant departure from how most GIS and online mapping systems work. So when you do click Create Story, your first choice is, okay, what kind do you want? And if you don't know, and you click this Ask the Pros, it'll even try to guide you through, okay, maybe we want a narrative, or maybe we have a set of places, but I already know the first one I want to do, which is this map tour. And each of the templates work a little bit different, but I wanted to do this since the geotagged photos were brought up. One of the things about any of these online maps is that all of the information that you're referring to has to be somewhere online. And pictures, it does need to be somewhere online. If you have the paid version of ArcGIS Online, which I'll talk about briefly at the end, you can actually upload your images right into Esri servers and store them there. If not, they have to be somewhere else online, and there's many places that they could be. The place I happen to use is Flickr, but you could also have videos on YouTube, you can have stuff with Google, and there's other ways that you can do it as well. But those images need to live somewhere online. So I'm going to click on Flickr, and I set up a username, which has a few public folders that I use. And so I just looked up the username, and I can see my public folders. I will also say that you can choose it based on a tag. So if you happen to have, for example, a Flickr account, and you wanted certain pictures to be shown and not others, you could put them in an album, or you could use a specific tag. But of course, they need to be publicly visible in order for this to work. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's a variety of them, but I'm going to grab my Riverwalk San Antonio set and click on Import. So what this does is it grabs the pictures, it looks at them, it sees if they have location information, and if they do, they put it on the map. And you can see that this to locate 0 and located 6 shows that there were 6 pictures that knew their location and 0 that did not know their location. If you had pictures that did not know your location, you can tell them one picture at a time where they're located on the ground. Now, I've never done this before. The interface is okay for this. I've actually had somebody in a workshop I was teaching say that if you're going to do this and you're using Flickr, that Flickr's interface for doing this is actually a lot better than ArcGIS Online's interface for putting it on the ground. So their suggestion was, if you have pictures you don't know and you're storing them in Flickr, go ahead, use Flickr to put this geotagging information on and then add them to ArcGIS Online. So, of course, it's always good to check. Yes, all 6 pictures showed up. They're right along the river. It looks good. And I click on Import. So it's automatically then creating the first version of this map tour. And you can see that it's already built a whole lot of it. So here's our ability to change to the different pictures. We have this down here as well. You can customize each of these. So if you want this one to be blue, for example, and this map picture seems like maybe it should be in the beginning, you can click on this Organize and drag it over here so it reorders it. So there's lots of different things that you can do. You can change the background map. Let's say I wanted it to be imagery. Zoom in to see, and as you move around the screen, it will bring you to the different locations and the Riverwalk. So, if you're done and you're okay with this, you can of course edit the name, you can edit the description, you can change a lot of these things. You can just click Save, and then once it's saved, you can click Share. And in order for other people to see it, it has to be visible publicly, so I'm going to click Share Publicly. And here is your URL, which you can hand off to somebody else that has your map built. So from geotag pictures to interactive website you can send to people is literally a couple of minutes. Now, you might want to change more things in this. If you want to change more, you click on the Settings tab up here, and it has a bunch of settings. And again, this is very graphical. So here's your layout. You can choose different colors. You can control what's up here in the header. And there's a couple of other features related to just the way the data are set up. But one by one you can change these. You can click an Apply button, and you can go ahead and save, and then that version of the map that you have shared with people will automatically be updated. So fairly straightforward, as long as you have those geotagged photos or can tag them yourself. Anybody have any quick questions on this specific type? I start with this first just because it's very different than the others, and in some ways it's very simple as long as you have geotagged photos in the right place. But getting geotagged photos and getting them in the right place is something that can take a little bit of time and effort. By the way, this is the hotel, the bottom floor of the hotel at the conference. The river was literally flowing through the hotel. I don't know where it came from on the other side because it sort of came out of the sidewalk. But
Shane, we've got another question in the questions pane.
Sure.
Where does the base map for your Riverwalk come from? Is it a default publicly available map that ArcGIS has?
Yes. So these base maps are base maps that Esri makes available to people. So you can see there's a variety of them. Some of these are open. So for example, OpenStreetMap is open. Some of these are things that Esri creates. I like this dark and light gray canvas. It's not a good example for this map, but sometimes this, let me see, dark, load. Oh, it's zoomed in too far probably. It provides this nice sort of general background context for your data. And this isn't a good example for it, but often when you're trying to show data, it can get very noisy with the images in the background, and sometimes just having this nice background map that automatically adjusts and shows an appropriate amount of information can be really useful. So you can put a lot of different things in the background of this map. You can control this map. If you go to ArcGIS Online, which we don't have time to do in this webinar, but if you actually went to see how can I edit maps in this, you can go and edit this map and put whatever data in there that you would like. But without doing that, you have the choice of these that are here. All right.
There's another question about geotagging photos, but we might get you to keep moving and get you to send me and Kel some further information about geotagging.
Maybe that's its own webinar.
Yeah.
It's funny because in the workshop, I almost hesitate to do this map first because there's so many conversations that ensue about geotagging photos, but obviously it's a topic of interest. So, and it does sometimes take a little time to figure out the correct workflow to make it happen. So let me just show a few other things, and if there's extra time at the end, then maybe we can talk a little bit more about photos. So as far as other maps, most of these maps work in a very similar way. This map journal, the Cascade is a little bit different, but map series, and let's just do a swipe map because remember the swipe can also be a spyglass because people seem to like those. Now it says to create a swipe or story glass, use this button to figure out what map you want to use. So I don't have a lot of good maps, but let's just go ahead and do one map here. It shows you, do you want the vertical bar or the spyglass? We'll just do the vertical bar to start. Swipe, do you want to actually have it compare two different maps, or do you want to have it reveal one type of data? So if you had, let's say areas of cyanobacteria blooms laid on top of an aerial image, you could have this swipe allow you to show and reveal the cyanobacteria bloom. Or you can pick a completely different sort of map. If you have multiple maps, you can either have it in My Content, or you can go out and find other maps that exist on the internet. So I'll just use this map and then say next. And then you have the ability to configure, do I want the description or not? Do I want the legend or not? Do I want the swipe series, which will let me have multiple tabs of swipe? And so I'm not going to do the pop-up because it doesn't make a sense for this. Do you want to have people be able to search for addresses or not? And then I click Open the App. So inside, it's creating, based on your choices, that template now. And granted, you could edit this and make some changes. All of those things that we did, if you click on Settings here, you can get back to those, and then also a few other things, the header, the theme, where the map starts zoomed into. And here's your swipe where you can hide and reveal and compare. Now if you wanted to change it to a spyglass, you just click on Settings, go back to select this layout, and click Apply. And this is one of the few times where you actually have to reload the page in order for this change to happen. Bummer, I didn't save it. Rookie mistake. Always save your maps before you do anything else. Let's rebuild it here. So now instead of the swipe, it's that Spyglass app version of the application. I will save it. Close. And also, if I go back here to this My Stories tab, what you're going to see, ooh, looks like you have created a new story. Let's refresh it. And so now each of these are visible, and you can do some management of each of them here. And what it's doing too is it's checking, all right, are these maps that you used okay? Are these maps that you used, are they all okay? What about these images that you use, are they there? So you can do some troubleshooting and some management of your story maps sort of right in that interface. All right. And just going to show one other type of map here. We could go on to do a lot of these, but let's show this map series because I think both the map series and map journal work in very similar ways with the way that they are created. There's this concept, so as you can see, whether you want tab or side accordion or bulleted, it's just a choice here. So let's do, side accordion and click start. This will be demo. Right. And basically what it's asking you to do is, what's your first entry? You have two different things. Number one, you have something that's going to live over here on the side. And number two, you're going to have some other thing that's over here. So sort of this side panel in the main stage. So my first side panel will be, let's say, extension.org. And I don't want it to be a map. I'm going to put it as a website and type in extension.org. And you can either have it fill the web page, fit, center, customize, you can have it unload when they go away or not. And we'll click on add here and see if it works. So you can add whatever text or images or even embed videos if you want and say, Let's click on this embed. You can see that you have to have them hosted somewhere, just like we currently talked about before. Let's go ahead and grab one of these pictures from the Riverwalk. And then I'm going to save it. You can see in order they're saying, yep, only you can see it. Why don't you make it public so that everybody can see the story? Good. So now it's public. And then I go back here and I say, okay, I'm going to add another one, which is down here at the bottom. Click add, and I'm going to say, let's say UNH Cooperative Extension. And I'm going to add another web page in here. I can't remember. I think actually our website doesn't work very well when it's embedded. So why don't I just say UNH, University of New Hampshire. Configure. Add. See if it works. Yeah, sometimes certain websites do not like to be embedded, and it takes, there's some playing around that's necessary, so why don't I try a different one? Oh, it shouldn't be S. It should be, see if this works. Nope. Yeah, I have found that sometimes there's a bug when it comes to, or not a bug, but just a feature of different website security, that sometimes secure websites will not load in these. So there is a bit of playing around. ESPN.com, for example, that you have to do sometimes. And sometimes they work better embedded, sometimes they work better not embedded. All right. Instead of that then, let's go ahead and just add a map. There's our Riverwalk map. Do that instead. Save that. And we'll add a third one, which is nice picture. Go back. And we'll add an image. I'll grab an image from, let's say, someplace on campus here. So I'll go ahead and save this, and then I will see what the story looks like. So keep in mind that this side is an interactive web page because I embedded a web page, and this picture is visible here. When I click at University of New Hampshire, it comes up to load the interactive map on the side, and then when I click on nice picture, it displays that image over here. And I will say that the vast majority of the rest of the sort of building of narrative type of story maps use very, very similar. Add something here to the side, control what's on the main stage. And these also have settings. So if you said, nope, I actually wanted this to be bulleted, go back and apply, and it changes it already to be bulleted. So then if you viewed that version, you would have the bullets over here. And again, from the amount of time we have, I don't want to go through any further, but it's very similar the way you do map series and this map journal, which is some of the most popular. Crowdsource and shortlist are sort of specific things based on different, sort of a different approach. The Cascade is similar to map journal in some ways with that immersive narrative, but I will say it is a little bit harder to set up. But it's not as hard as it would be to do that without this story map template. Creating a similar website without it would be much more difficult. All of these from the standpoint of people who don't know how to code. So all of this, if you know how to do the coding yourself or you have somebody who knows how to do it, then maybe it might be easier for them or for you to do the coding. But my base level of assumption is that people aren't doing coding. If you are doing coding, the templates for all of these can be downloaded and can be hosted locally. So if you get your map to a certain point and you like it and you want to grab it and put it on your server and then do some editing of the code on your server, you certainly can do that as well. Most of the people that I talk to and work with aren't interested in that, but it is definitely an option. And the source code for all of the templates are available and open. So a few more quick things to mention at the end here, but I want to pause for any other questions.
Any questions from anyone? Or anything else that anyone would like to see in the, we've got about 10 minutes left, so any particular functions anyone wants to ask or see in that time?
While we're waiting, I will say that making the right maps and collecting the correct images and getting them in the right place and having the right video and actually thinking through the story you want to tell and building the final version does take time. I mean, there's still a lot of thought involved. It's just that now with this template and this online system, the technical challenges are fairly low, and what you're able to produce is fairly compelling. But still, creating a final version of something that works really well will take time and energy to assemble the data, get it in place, and even decide what story to tell and how to tell it. Okay, is there another question, or I'm going to move on to the last?
We've just got one more. Does it have to be images? For example, if you wanted to add graphs, do you have to turn them into PNG or image files in order to include them?
I guess it would depend on where they're hosted. I mean, well, number one, it has to be somewhere online. So whatever you have, it needs to be online. I'm pretty sure that some of the website mapping that we use here at UNH, Cooperative Extension, is Tableau. It's built in and interfaces with some of the data systems we have. And somebody tried embedding a Tableau interactive map as a web page inside of a story map, and it worked fine. So I would say if you have something that's online, that's embeddable, if you can get the embed code, which often is just like in the upper corner of some of these maps, you'll have a share or a link button. And if you click on this link, it could give you a link. Sometimes there's embed code in various websites. You should be able, most things should work. Whether or not every single thing will work, I don't know. But I don't know, it would have to be somewhere online. But I don't know that there's a specific limitation, and most things that I've tried have worked as long as the HTTP versus HTTPS thing is straightened out, which is not something due to Esri, it's just due to the way that web security works. They won't let, a secure page won't be loaded inside of an insecure page, and a secure page won't load an insecure page. So sometimes there's a mismatch and you might have to do a little dancing. But I don't know if they had a specific type of graph they were talking about, or
I'm not sure if it was a specific type of graph. Michael, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you could elaborate if that didn't quite answer. No, it wasn't a specific type, just graphs in general. So I guess we can keep moving. Okay. I don't think there's any other questions.
Yep. So just the last thing I'm going to say is some resources, and I'll put them up on the screen here and then show you each of them quickly. So this top website is a website that was born right before the San Antonio meeting on a group that I've been working with for a while, and we have a new place to have things. And this is a community of practice that's been together for quite a while in the US version of e-extension called Map Assist, which is the Geospatial Technology group. We sort of reformed and refocused around the idea of inspiring extension people and like-minded people, but specifically cooperative extension folks, to see why they might want to use maps and also to help them to use it. And so I'm going to show that website just briefly, but that's the link. And these two other bit.ly links are two story maps that I've created myself for use. One of them was a conference presentation I did, a lightning talk. So it's 5 every 15 seconds your slide advances and you have 20 slides. And it was about the power of mapping and why extension should be using it. So I thought, well, that'll be great. Why don't I go ahead and create a story map that basically captures my presentation and then have the last slide be this link so that people can go home with it and then sort of have the same amount of information or similar information. And there are some times where, you know what, why even do a PowerPoint at all? Why not just do a story map? And that's the case with this second bit.ly link, story map types, that I started working on last Wednesday, because I taught a story map class and I usually go through and show all the examples of the story maps like I just did, and they said, well, that's nice, that's great, but can you send us links to all of these maps? And also I had a series of links, and I thought, well, why don't I just create a story map that has all of these? So that's an example of how something I'm going to use in workshop for a presentation and then let people walk home with it. And then our GIS training center here, which does in-person classes mostly, so it may not be 100% relevant to people largely on the other side of the world, but if you want to know the types of hands-on workshops that I do in New Hampshire and around New England, gisworkshops.org will bring you straight to our website, which hopefully will be changing soon. January is supposed to be the new rollout, but that link will still work to bring you into our website, my website here at Cooperative Extension. And I will just show you very briefly those websites that I mentioned. So this EX Geospatial is, again, trying to get extension people interested in and figuring out how to actually do maps. So we have a couple of different components. One is this link just called Maps, which I'm trying to collect examples of maps that have been used, online maps that are being used for outreach and engagement. Some of these are extensions, some of these are not extensions. A lot of them are story maps, but not all of them are story maps. They don't have to be story maps to be on here, but that seems to be the type that people are using the most. We have map tales, which are sort of stories about how people are using maps. We don't have a lot of these, but this is an example of how University of Connecticut Extension has really done a lot with story mapping in their work. We have webinars. Look at that. Right there, the current webinar, which we've done on story maps, and you can see some going back, but then also a bunch of different GIS-related webinars on a variety of topics, and how-tos, which right now are really weak. I think we might have one. And we're not trying to be the how do you do everything in GIS, because you can just use Google for that. But we're trying to come up with very specific things that are relevant to support some of the ideas that we have in this map tales and maps section. So use this website as a resource, maybe to show people, see ideas, get ideas. And if you have a map that you've created that you're willing to share, that would be great. We would love to feature examples of online maps that are being used for outreach and engagement and education. And if you're a Twitter person, you can tweet us. And if you're not, you can just click on this submit a form, and this nice little form pops up that gives us all of the information that we need. It should only take a minute or 2 or 3 to fill out. And just so you can see, when you go to maps and you click on any of these, so for example, here's a trail map for a local town, the post is relatively simple, but it just shows here's an example, here's a summary, audience technology, here's the people to get in touch with if you have questions, and then here's how you see the online version of that map. So we're trying to gather examples. So anybody has examples about outreach, education, or engagement using online maps, that would be great. And then the other one that I'll show you just quickly is this story map types is something I've been working on since Wednesday, and I finished today. Hooray! It has now, it's an accordion style story map, and it has an example, the examples I just showed you, of each of the types of maps. So if you want to know what a basic map looks like, here's a basic map. You want to know what a swipe map looks like, here's a swipe map. The other thing I've done is I put a couple of icons here. So for example, if you want to see this map without this sidebar, you can click here and it goes to a full screen version of that map, just loads in another tab. If you want to see what does Esri have for examples, you can click on that green button and it brings you right into Esri's page and shows the examples that they have. And if you want to see what we have on Map Assist, you can click on this button. And we don't have a ton of accordions, we have a couple, including that same map. It'll bring it to that. So over time, not only will this allow people to see and explore different types of maps, but then also be a resource to see other examples of these maps. And of course, at the bottom here, I also put, hey, are you willing to share your maps? We'd love to see them. Because I think it's really important not only to talk about how the maps can be used, but to collect examples so that people can relate very closely to the ways in which they're actually being used. And we're not trying to be a website that has every single map that exists, but I think what we can offer is maps that are being used in that way, because it's harder to find those. Extension people in the US probably is very relevant to extension people in other countries and is equally relevant to any organization who's trying to do outreach and engagement. So it doesn't have to be just US Extension folks who are doing it. So here's all the blurb of different ways to get a hold of me through either e-extension, Map Assist, or Cooperative Extension, or just me directly. But that exgeospatial.org and gsworkshops.org are sort of the big web presences that I'm related to working on this. So that's looks like the end of the hour, and is there anything else?
Yeah, any final questions for Shane? And Shane, you mentioned that extension community of practice. So over here in Oz, a lot of people on this would be familiar with our communities of practice, the field crop diseases and crop nutrition, which are the Australian versions of the Extension Oz. But there are quite a few people in this webinar that are involved with mapping and GIS, ArcGIS, so they can join that community of practice, the mapping one in the US, if they wish, can't they?
Sure. Yeah, if you go to that exgeospatial.org website, just let me go back to that quickly. See, in the sea of all these, I'll just type it in again. If you go to this sort of have on the side About Us, and you click Join Map Assist, we sort of detail ways that you can become part of it. But if people get in touch with me, the only thing about being part of the extension, as you probably know, and I bet you it's similar for you, is just sort of the approach and your willingness to have a certain outlook on the materials or information that you're sharing. But yeah, no, there's no restriction at all as far as folks from different countries or even folks from outside of academia or extension. There's no restriction. It's just if they don't have a us.edu email address, they'll have to get in touch with me and I'll have to invite them. But yeah, we welcome people, because the whole idea is that we try to get together to share ideas and share information and inspire each other. So yes, they're more than welcome to consider getting involved. I'd be happy to connect with them, or if they connect with me, I'll definitely get back in touch with them.
Awesome. Any final questions for Shane before we let him head back home, since it's about 7 o'clock at night now, your time?
8 o'clock at night. Hooray!
8 o'clock at night. We got an extra hour. So unless I don't think anyone's barging in, there's nothing coming up. So Shane, yeah, thank you so much for
you're welcome.
yeah,
And thank you very much for the invitation. And I'll also just say that part of what our group tries to do is that none of us think that we're the only people that know this, but in GIS there's so many things you can know that between the group of us we know much more than we would individually. So there might have been people on this webinar that knew most of this, but even if they knew a lot of it, hopefully they got some new things. I know every time I teach a class I learn new things, and that's one of the reasons, as I said, that broadening the group of people who participate in Map Assist or our community of practice would benefit everybody. So I'm definitely glad that you brought that up, and we'd be happy to talk with that. But again, thank you very much for the invitation. It was nice to meet you.